Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about how to improve your child's life with OCD in a bigger picture, just the overall struggles that kids with OCD have. And we're going to talk about what those are in different capacities of their life. And I'm excited because I invited Dr. Jonathan Abramowitz to the show, who I have been a long-term fan of. He is a licensed clinical psychologist. He has a private practice in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He specializes in OCD and anxiety disorders. He is really a leading authority on these topics. He's a professor and associate chair of psychology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I've always enjoyed listening to him talk about OCD and his methods, his thoughts around it, because he's very articulate. And I feel like he simplifies things. And I always love people who have really solid clinical sound advice and they can communicate that in a really effective way. And he's got the gift of that. He has a new book out called Living Well with OCD, which is a book that is targeted for adults with OCD, but I read it and it's a fantastic read for parents too. Even though it's not geared towards parents, it's geared towards the sufferer. But I feel like it is a really helpful roadmap of the different areas that we need to navigate as parents, helping our kids, teens, and young adults with OCD. I also think it's a fantastic book to recommend to our older teens and young adults because it is an easy read and it does encompass so much more than ERP, exposure response prevention. And so we'll get into that in a second when I have you listen to my interview with him. He's also the author of The Family Guide to Getting Over OCD, Reclaim Your Life and Help Your Loved One. He wrote that back in 2021. I don't know how I missed that. And I am going to have him come back on. So stay tuned because I feel like that is going to be a really good book to cover and to talk about how you navigate as a family. But stay tuned for that one because that one is in the works for the future. Before we jump into today, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and luckily they're available in the U.S. and outside the U.S. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. I also want to mention that it's important to get your own support network. And I try to do that. For those of you that don't have your local support network, you can join the AT Parenting Community, which is an online community that I created back in 2019, where you can join us and hundreds of other parents like you from all over the world, where we support each other. We have weekly live classes on topics that parents want to talk about. We connect parents with parents and kids with kids. We have support group calls each month on Zoom. We have support group calls for kids and teens. And you have a library in our member portal full of videos, worksheets. And you also have the forums where you can get direct access to me and my guidance. And we have a member Facebook group where you can get guidance and support from other families. So much in the AT Parenting community. You can get your name on the wait list. We do open it up privately to the wait list. We don't really advertise that. That may or may not be happening right now, but maybe just for the next day, depending on when you're listening to this. So you can join that at atparentingcommunity.com. All right. Well, without further ado, here is my interview with John Abramowitz. Well, I want to welcome John Abramowitz to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Natasha. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I love your new book, Living Well with OCD. I think it just offers a lot of practical tips that go beyond, developing skills like ERP, exposure response prevention, to living like a high quality of life, which I think is a bigger, more important goal. Yeah. So I wanted to invite you on to talk about how we can apply those skills that you talk about in your book to kids, teens, and young adults.
Definitely. Let's do it.
For those parents that aren't familiar with you, most people in the OCD world are familiar with you, but if you can give a little background, that would be awesome.
Sure, yeah. So I am a professor at the University of North Carolina. I'm actually the director of our clinical psychology training, a PhD training program right now. And my area of research and my clinical interests and what I teach all kind of, revolve around OCD, anxiety related, problems and exposure and response prevention therapy, really cognitive behavior therapy, more generally. And since when I was in grad school myself, I was kind of randomly assigned to work with someone who had OCD, an adult. And I went to the literature and I went to my supervisors and, we did exposure and response prevention. And this person who was really, severely symptomatic with their OCD, they got better in like a matter of a few months. And it blew me away as someone who was new in the field. I think it blew the patient, this young lady away who was just, and this was in the 90s and we didn't know as much about OCD then as we do now, but she never expected her family, they never expected her to make this progress. And I was just sold, like, here is a problem that we can understand and treat. And the treatment, it doesn't work for everyone, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit why I, wrote the Living Well with OCD book. But I was hooked, so I just kind of followed my career path, just really in love with helping folks and learning more about OCD.
Yeah, and fortunate that you did and that you stumbled on that because I feel like you're one of those voices in the OCD field that I really resonate with. There's certain researchers and just advocates of OCD that have just a strong voice that makes sense to me. And I'm like, every time
Oh,
that person talks, I'm like, yeah, right? That's exactly what I would say. That makes sense to me.
oh,
So,
that's very
yeah,
nice of you to say. Thank
yeah,
you.
I love your work. And I feel like
Ah,
whenever I hear you talking with IOCDF or the things that you produce, I feel like they make a lot of sense and you present it in a very clear way. And so it's not
thanks.
surprising that your new book has the same essence, that it talks about a lot of practical things in looking at how to have a good high quality life. So I kind of broke them down into categories when I was thinking about how I wanted to talk. And the first one was about shame and guilt. And I feel like that's a big one. And that's a lot of the stuff you talk about in the book. I feel like sometimes you get OCD therapists, maybe new in the field, and they learn ERP and they don't want to really talk about these other things that, and I've seen that even with my own kids in therapy sometimes in the past, where it's like only exposures, we're only doing exposures. And what about these other things that are going on in their life that you really focus on in your book? So shame and guilt, that's
Yeah.
a big one. Can you maybe talk about how that shows up and then some things that we can do to support our kids, teens, and young adults with that?
Absolutely. First of all, those are all very nice things to say. I appreciate that. Yeah. So, right. When people have OCD, look, we know that about 50% of people who have OCD, they also experience depression, like clinical depression. And what goes with that? Well, feelings of guilt, feelings of shame, feelings of worthlessness. OCD, for most people who have it, gets in the way of functioning. It causes a lot of distress. People can't do the things that they want to be able to do. They can't enjoy their life the way that, their friends are enjoying it or their siblings are enjoying it or things like that. And, that can feel really hopeless to someone. So they can feel like they're letting other people down. They can feel like they're letting their parents down. And guilt kind of comes along with that. OCD often, in families results in conflict. So the child with OCD might think, it's all my fault that, the family is so conflictual and that, we're having all these arguments. Or if the family isn't going on vacations because of the OCD, the child personalizes it. It's my fault. And we see that with adults. We see that with kids as well. And I agree 100% with what you're saying. Exposure and response prevention is or are, I guess, the tools that we have that can help to reduce the symptoms of OCD, the obsessions and compulsions themselves. But OCD has a large fingerprint that's more than just obsessions and compulsions. Like you're saying, it gets in the way of, it causes depression. It gets in the way of how people feel about themselves.
Yeah, it really does. And then you do get those secondary issues like depression, clinical depression. And I wonder like how parents can help sort out, you know, the reality of yes, you can't go on trip. I mean, I feel like we're living this right now in my life too. You know, it's like
Uh-huh.
we can't go on trips right now,
Yeah.
because we're dealing with anxiety and OCD. And it is hard as a parent to not communicate that, to your child. And I mean, you just highlighting that that is an issue, I think bringing that awareness to a parent is really helpful. So watching what we say for sure
Yeah.
um, might be key. But I wonder, how do we help them not feel like it's their problem or that they're not causing the problem when in reality, I mean, like the disorder is actually causing it, but the ripple effect is impacting the family too.
Yeah, and I think you just hit the nail on the head that we want to blame the disorder, not the child, not the kid. Right. So, why are you doing this to us? Right. You never want to say something like that. Right. Instead, you want to say something like, gee, yeah, it really sucks that OCD is getting in the way. And there will be some kids who take that personally. Well, OCD is me and all that. And so you want to differentiate between the kid and their OCD. We are all complex, people. No one is their OCD. OCD is a part of you or a part of your kid, but it's not who they are. Everyone has things they do well, everyone. And everyone has things they do poorly, everyone. And so reinforcing that message, you are not your OCD. OCD is just, a darn thing that's happening to you right now. That's a part of our family right now. We can hopefully do something to reduce its impact, but the OCD isn't who you are. It's a part of you. It's a part of what's going on. But then you also have all these other qualities as well. And I think just reinforcing that, and catching if your kid is kind of identifying with themselves as OCD. I am OCD, OCD is me. Then yeah, we want to try to kibosh that.
Yeah, I like that because I think just doing that, just separating out the disorder from the person in and of itself reduces the guilt and shame because it's like this is happening to you as much as it's happening to the rest of us.
Yeah.
That we're all struggling with OCD, you as well. And so I,
Yeah.
I do like that shift. And it may not come naturally, I think, as you're talking initially, but
No, and look, in the heat of the moment when, a parent is frustrated, stuff can come out. And you don't have to have a family with OCD in order to know that. But it really, I think it pays dividends to think carefully about what we're saying to our kids. They are eyes and ears, right? And they are soaking it in, and they look up to their parents, and what they say weighs a ton on them, both good and bad. You know,
yeah.
yeah, we can talk more about that if we want, but blaming OCD rather than blaming the child, I think is important.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
And having to be intentional with your words, which may not feel intuitive at first. And I know
yeah,
just from my own personal experience, I stumble or I'll say things and I'll be like, oh gosh, that was a horrible thing to say. And you have to
yeah.
kind of repair it.
We all do it. I mean, right? Every parent, and thankfully, if it's not a pattern that's happening all the time, it probably for most kids won't have an effect. But if it is something that's happening over and over and over again, the kid starts to receive this consistent message. I'm damaged goods because I have OCD, and we would never want that.
Yeah. And I mean, and sometimes you can say something and you think it's landing pretty well, and then the reaction of your child is, their response is, I'm so I'm a horrible person. I'm just ruining this family. And sometimes their response can kind of indicate what to say or where to go from there. Because, I know sometimes we say things that seem innocuous and they're like, that's really a supportive statement, and then they
Yeah.
personalize that as well. So
So you bring up a really good point. Not only watching what we say, but also be good listeners to our kids,
yeah, I
right?
know checking out that response because I mean I can say literally anything to my son and it's full victim. And I think when you add the moral OCD theme sometimes with our kids, they're already now predisposed to have that extra layer of I'm a bad person, I'm doing bad things, I'm ruining my family. So
Yeah.
even being extra careful with those type of themes.
A lot of people, adults and kids alike with OCD have, yeah, like you're saying, kind of a tender conscience. Yeah, they don't want to do anything bad. And sometimes they have that all or nothing, thinking. I have to be perfect, otherwise I'm terrible. And so, again, listening and correcting that where possible can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing that I really loved in your book was this exercise that you have about how much time OCD is taking away from a person. And I wonder if you can kind of go into a little bit about how that can help and what parents can maybe do to highlight that in a way that is therapeutic and helpful.
Yeah, having an exercise where someone or maybe a family together, if it's a kid, my book is primarily for adults, but I think
Yeah.
that maybe the next one I should write would be for
Ah,
families.
very good.
But yeah, like together to kind of go through and put down on paper or on the computer some visualization of how OCD gets in the way. It's one thing to talk about it, but then to actually see it and to actually spend some time kind of working through it, I think is more powerful and it helps provide some incentive for you know, hopefully making some changes.
Yeah, I do think that's a really worthwhile exercise. And I do want to say about your book that one, I felt like it was a very easy read for parents. It's not like heavy with the dogma or like, the wordings. It's a very easy, flowy book to read for a parent to get ideas. But I also think it's an easy book to hand over to a teen or young adult. And there's a lot of families in my community that are raising young adults that they can feel empowered to help themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote it with exactly that in mind. Like, here are a number, just the chapters are just loaded with, tips and strategies and tricks and all of that. And the idea being that, look, OCD can be chronic, and sometimes people aren't at a place where they're ready to do therapy, or therapy has failed them for one reason or another. And so what do we do now? And like I said before, OCD has a big footprint. So what do we do? That a lot, like you said, a lot of treatment for OCD doesn't address family relationships and guilt and shame and things like that. And so even people who have gone through therapy sometimes have that residual stuff going on. Here are some strategies that folks can read and use, and maybe not all of them are going to be helpful, but maybe you can find some that address what you're looking for.
Yeah. And it's just not jargon filled. And so it's not like
Yeah.
do this methodology, step one, step two, step three, and then you're going to be rid of OCD. It's a really practical guide. You could even kind of flip through and look at the subheadings of like, oh, I'm having a problem at work, or I'm having a problem at school, having a problem with my family. And and what I do like too, which I don't see in a lot of books, is this wiggle room of, ERP may not work 100% for everyone. Um, and that there are barriers, and here are the barriers, and here are the misperceptions about ERP,
Yeah.
and that you can still read this book and get something from it. And also you mentioned different methodologies and different approaches. And so it's just this really all-encompassing book about how do you just live your life. So I do just want to mention that because I do feel like some parents have young adults or older teenagers who won't listen to them and won't go into therapy, but you throw a book at them and they really want the help, but they just don't want to kind of let go of their control and their power. And
Yeah.
so, and you only have one shot. It's like I can only give them one book and they may or may not just pick up this one book. And I feel like this is a good one because it's not a book that after I finished it felt like some people are going to read this and not find progress. There's something for everybody in there as far as how do you navigate this really bumpy world, even if ERP is not working and you're kind of stuck in your bedroom. There's
Yeah.
something in there that's going to talk about how do you navigate your world. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's great that the book lands this way because that's exactly, what I had in mind and my editors when we were conceptualizing it and writing it. ERP is the best that we've got. There's no doubt about that. Science is really clear on that. But it's not the only thing that will help. And as you were saying, it's not a panacea for everyone, because even if you do it, it doesn't like bulldoze everything over all the time. And there are plenty of folks, it's a challenging treatment. So not everybody is at a place where they can do it. And that's exactly why I wrote this for folks who are not ready to do the therapy, or maybe it hasn't gotten them all the way home, or they're maybe on the fence about it. And here's some other things that you can do to manage the symptoms. The symptoms might not go away without good cognitive behavior therapy, but here's some things you can do to help yourself to be able to lead, a decent existence.
Yeah. And some people just need to get that traction. They kind of need to
Right.
get some successes under their belt before they can embrace ERP. And I think
Yeah.
that's an important thing. You do, at the end of the book, you talk about misperceptions about ERP, which I appreciated. I wonder if you can talk about some of those.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one myth that I run into, at least, is that ERP is like too harsh, too extreme to really be helpful. That it's like cruel and excessive to make someone approach, the things that they're afraid of, especially a child, right? And that, it's going to make OCD worse, or they'll have a breakdown or something like that. And it's just not true. That's just not how it works. We know from lots of research that the majority of folks who have this therapy actually, benefit it. The other thing is we never force people to do exposure therapy. That would be very unethical, right? So the therapist and the child meet and develop a treatment plan. The therapist explains, how the therapy works to the parent and the child. And also, I think it's a misunderstanding that ERP, exposure and response prevention, is all about just provoking as much anxiety as possible. That's not how it is. It's more about helping the child to learn, I don't have to be afraid in this situation. I can approach this situation and develop confidence that I can get through it. So I think that's a big myth. Another one is that, okay, so ERP, it's cognitive behavioral. It's very superficial. It doesn't address like, underlying issues, the deep-seated psychological factors that might influence, OCD at various levels. And here again, I think that we know that cognitive behavioral treatments really are the most effective, as I was saying before, the most effective treatments for OCD. And there's no need to dive into like, is it genetic? Did my family do something to cause this? We don't know what the causes of OCD are. We really don't understand that. We have some guesses, but we really don't know for sure. And so it really is about working on, extinguishing these fears and helping people to stop their rituals so that they can learn that, it's okay to approach these situations.
And that's a good one because, I mean, how many of us have seen clients that have spent years and thousands of dollars
Oh, yeah.
digging into their background and the trauma of this, and not to discount trauma, but I mean, things that, they saw somebody throw up in third grade, they need to do EMDR because they saw someone throw up in third grade. And I'm like, how many of us have seen people throw up and don't develop a
Right.
metaphobia? Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
well, I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess another myth is that like, well, I did exposure on my own and it didn't work. I touched the floor once and it didn't work, or I didn't check this and my fear didn't go away. And again, I think that's a misunderstanding of how exposure therapy works. It's a systematic approach where you work with a therapist, and it's, I use worksheets when I do this with my patients and clients. It's not just about like, let's just go into a situation and do it and then you're done. There's a method to it. I won't get into all the details now, but planned, intentional, approaching of your fears in a controlled and supportive way. That's probably not what happens when people say, oh, I tried this, or when a parent says, I tried it with my kid and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You want a therapist who really knows what they're doing.
Yeah. And you're bringing up a good point too, because one thing that I often hear is, my son's doing exposures all day. He goes to school, he has to
Right.
deal with everything. And, he comes home and his whole day is an exposure. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not what ERP is,
No.
And so I think just being exposed to your trigger is not exposure response prevention.
Exactly. And half the time, what's happening when you're exposed to a trigger is you're fighting, you're white knuckling it.
Mhm.
And we don't do that in therapy. That's not therapeutic. That's called having OCD.
Mhm.
In exposure therapy, we want folks to, like we talked about, gradually in a controlled way approach their feared situations and be open to that anxiety. And I guess that gets to this other myth, which is that, if you do exposure and response prevention, you just got to sit there with your anxiety. You just got to sit with it. And a lot of people say, I got to sit with anxiety. I don't like that term, because no one's sitting with anything. We want people to act with anxiety. We want kids to learn, I can go to school, I can play with my friends, I can do homework, I can have lunch, I can do whatever with anxiety, because we all do sometimes, right? So it's not about sitting, it's about operating, it's about learning how to be more open to the experience of anxiety and not letting it kind of bully you around, uh,
Yeah.
and out of the things that are important to you.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Living with the anxiety, which is kind of what you talk about in your book and in general, is more natural and more generalistic. I can apply this to real life because just sitting in a therapy office and, sitting there uncomfortable because I just touched something isn't how you're going to do it in real life. And I think sometimes parents, we have this conversation of distraction versus I'm always refocus your attention. You do an exposure, refocus your attention, and then we're not distracting, and what's the difference? This nuance of I'm not doing something and then checking in and saying, am I feeling anxious still? Because I'm trying to get rid of my uncomfortable feeling. It's more of I'm bringing it with me, and I'm not going to let it rob me of any more time. I'm going to focus on painting or playing a video game or doing something that I love while my anxiety is still there, which I think is more realistic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to make room for it. I'm going to make space for it. That's exactly right. And we're bringing it along for the ride, as we sometimes say.
Yeah.
And then I think, people have this idea that like improvement should be immediate and that it'll completely eliminate my anxiety and all that kind of stuff. And that's just not the way it works. This is a therapy that requires a lot of hard work and time and practice. And did I mention hard work and time and practice? You gotta stick with it. Sometimes gains happen fast. Sometimes they take a little while. And anxiety is not something that will ever be eliminated for any human being on the planet, really for any animal on the planet. We need anxiety. It protects us from threat, from harm. So this is not, ERP is not about how do I, confront my fear, sit with it, wait for the anxiety to go away, good, and then I'm never anxious again. ERP is, like you were saying before, it's about making room, becoming more open to anxiety, learning how to not be afraid of anxiety itself. And if you do that, thank goodness, it turns out that your anxiety will go down, but you still got to learn how to be okay with some anxiety because we all experience it.
Yeah. And I think sometimes there's this expectation that if I do ERP correctly, I won't get intrusive thoughts.
Right.
And, and I'll hear this all the time from parents. I don't think it's working because he says he's still having intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's getting people to understand that the intrusive thoughts that's not the focus. The focus is, can you function? Is it derailing you? Is it immobilizing you? Or is it this annoying little thing that's in the background that you're like, yep, there it is. It's my OCD, but I'm able to go and live a fruitful life.
Yeah, 100%. Intrusive thoughts are not the problem. Anxiety isn't really the problem. The problem is what we do when those things show up. It's how we fight them. It's how kids with OCD try to white knuckle it and fight them and do rituals and avoid. That's what makes this whole thing, worse. We all have intrusive thoughts. We'll have them till the day we die. Yeah. So it's how do we get better at having those? How do we make room for them?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Switching gears, because you cover a lot of topics and I want to cover some of these.
Yeah.
I like the chapter where you talk about privacy and disclosure.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really helpful discussion, especially with kids, teens, and young adults, where they don't know. Well, there's a couple of different things that I feel like it impacts. Sometimes kids don't know when to communicate to their peers. Sometimes parents kind of override their child's wishes as far as privacy goes and convey it to people that in their world that they don't want them to know about. So I wonder how do we address that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time and learned a lot, working on this. It is the person's right to decide what and when they want to disclose. There's some situations where it would be probably healthier to disclose, like at work if you need accommodations, for example. But then there might be some situations where it's less healthy to disclose if you're at some risk of, people, either if you're a kid making fun of you or some sort of discrimination or, the situation doesn't seem as safe for that kind of thing. But I really do think that it is up to the child to decide, when they want to and what they want to disclose. And so I talk about thinking through the pros and cons of, first of all, do I want to disclose this at all? How much do I want to disclose? And I also think it's really important to think through, what's my boundary? How much am I going to say about this to different people? And then I walk folks through how to do it, how to actually, come up with what am I going to say? And practicing, what you're going to say and preparing for different responses.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
So some of those responses might be wonderful. Oh, I'm so glad to, that you were able to disclose that to me. I understand. And I want to do what I can to help. And then other people are disparaging. And then some people, they mean well, but they don't really know what to say and it comes across the wrong way. So I try to cover all that.
It's really well scripted in the book where it really gives you very realistic responses and then role plays almost of like, how are you going to respond to this, which is a great roadmap. Even if you're a parent reading the book, it may be that you don't realize like the different types of responses your kids can get or the responses you're going to get as a parent when you share it with someone else. And and preparing, I think is important. I think as kids get older, I know I'm seeing this with my kids, they get more private, and it's important to respect that. I know my daughter had, she has a 504 plan, and she's got body focused repetitive behaviors as well. So she's picking her head, and she's wearing these like skull caps, to like prevent it. And she was going to school, and her teacher was like saying like, you have to take that hat off. And I was like, she didn't want to tell me, because I was like, that's one email. She also is allowed to go to the bathroom whenever she wants. And she has a teacher who's not letting her go to the bathroom. And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
and she doesn't want to tell me, because I was like, that's one email to your teacher, because you have a 504 plan. And like, Mama Bear comes out, and she's like, no, I don't want you to say anything. That's embarrassing, and so it's, even if
How old's your daughter?
she's 13.
Okay. So what, like seventh grade, something like
Yep.
that? So yeah.
Where when she was 10, I mean, she's had a 504 since she was like 6. And so at that time, she always wanted me to advocate for her, and always wanting. And so I think just being aware as a parent, like, that shifts over time. It's
Oh, yeah.
developmentally appropriate for her to be self-conscious and want more privacy. And it's not for me to override that, and disrespect her. So
Absolutely. Yeah, right. I mean, we just go through different phases as we're growing up. And I don't know about you, but for me, 13 was the most awkward time in the
worst.
world. And yeah, I didn't
it's
I didn't want
literally
my
the
parents
worst.
anywhere near me. And
Yeah.
yeah,
You just want to
exactly.
fast forward. You want to make, pretend like you don't remember 13.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, a great point. That's just so important to know your kid. And it's difficult enough when they have OCD, and now when these, violations of 504. So as a parent, you got to navigate and pick your battles, right? So where do you want to step in and say, no, I'm mom, I know best, and your teacher needs to know that she's violating like kind of the law by not
Yeah.
by not abiding by the do something, but also understanding, your kid might feel embarrassed and all that. And so sometimes, again, what's the ship you're going to go down with? And I think that's, knowing your kid, and then also knowing what I talk about in my book is knowing what the law and the rules are around things like accommodations, 504 plans, things like that when it comes to work and school. Really important stuff.
Yeah. And that is on my list. So let's move into that.
Okay.
I did like your section on 504 plans for people in the United States, and even, in Canada, they talk about accommodations, just different language.
Yeah.
What are some common accommodations, or like navigating that system when it comes to OCD?
Yeah, so some common kind of accommodations at school would be things like a quieter workspace to help kids improve their concentration, being able to take short breaks, from assignments, things like that, to be able to maybe just manage stress, or to if they if they feel like they need to do rituals. Um, the option to work, or well, I guess not work, but like learn from home, if that's something that is possible within a school. Flexibility on deadlines for papers, things like that. Yeah, I would say that those are, and access to support, counseling, things like that, a school counselor or something like that. And of course, detailed instructions, and a grading rubric and things like that, just to reduce anxiety and uncertainty around mistakes, things like that. A lot of folks with OCD, of course, have intolerance of uncertainty and feel like things need to be perfect, and that can get in the way of that as well. So those are some of the main kinds of like school accommodations.
Yeah. And I think a lot of parents don't realize that just because your child is doing well in school academically, or is even gifted. My daughter, both my kids, well, I have 3 kids, but the 2 that are still in school, well, the other one's in college, but they're gifted, but that doesn't mean that your child doesn't struggle. And so
Right.
a 504 plan is not about academic success. It's just about, are there things that are impeding their ability to function and succeed in the academic environment? They're getting straight A's. You still have that legal right to get a 504 plan.
Yeah, it's about leveling the playing field. So kids who have, in this case, OCD, have the same opportunities to succeed, just like someone who doesn't have OCD.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that's always a really helpful thing.
Yeah.
I want to end with kind of where your book ends too, which is strategies for long-term success.
Yeah.
So what are some things? I know parents can't do everything. I'm saying like, what can parents do? But really, I mean, I think we're just one piece of this puzzle. But for long-term success, what are some of the areas to focus on?
Yeah, well, I think, overall, trying to practice things like mindfulness, acceptance, these, I think, for a long time were like underutilized
Mm-hmm.
in mainstream psychotherapy, psychological treatments. And within the last couple of decades, they've really made their way in. And I think that's so important. I use those strategies now with a lot of the folks I work with. And when I'm talking about, mindfulness, I'm not talking about like, yoga or things like that, which are great. What I'm talking about is being able to identify the things that are important to you, your values in your life, and really working on moving towards those and identifying what are some of the things that are getting in the way, what are some of the obstacles, but not letting private experiences like intrusive thoughts we were talking about earlier, and anxiety and uncertainty, not letting those things trip us up, take us off of our game. I'm moving in the direction of the things that are important to me, despite the fact that I have anxiety. And so teaching people that they can do that, I think is really important. I think educating yourself, not reading too much, not compulsively, doing research about OCD and anxiety, but educating yourself about anxiety. I think having a support network is critical, whether that's within the family or friends of the, peers of the same age. In my book, I talk about in some instances, having an adult non-family member, or maybe like a great uncle or someone like that, who's not a part of the nuclear family, but can kind of come in and help. So having that kind of support, to offer empathy and patience, I think that's really important. And just kind of like we talked about before with shame and guilt, understanding that OCD is not who you are, right? Or if it's a kid, OCD is not who your kid is. It's one aspect of them, and we're all multi-dimensional.
Yeah, and I love that. And I do like the focus on mindfulness. I feel like in the last decade there's been this shift, with ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, kind of coming in and being a supplement to ERP, and looking at values and, purpose of life, like what we want. And I
Yeah,
also think we live in, the what ifs of the future and the regrets of the past, and that robs you of the present. And so learning how to anchor your brain is just an incredible tool for all of us, because how
yeah.
often are we actually in the present moment? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. And right. And whether you have OCD, or whether you're the parent of someone with OCD, or a sibling, or, a grandparent, or a child, someone with OCD, yeah, you don't have to have OCD to benefit from being able to be in the moment, because we all sometimes experience negative emotions and negative thoughts and all that. How do we and it's a part of life, right? It's not, those aren't bad. We judge those sometimes. And I think that's a mistake. I shouldn't have negative thoughts. I shouldn't feel anxious. That's not, I don't think it's not realistic, but it's also not healthy.
yeah.
Um, Private experiences, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, they're unpleasant. They're not dangerous, and they don't have to bully us and push us around. And so, learning how to make room for those things, I think that's so important. And that's something that you can do that doesn't involve exposure and response prevention. It is more of an agenda that you can decide to have, right? Or if you're the parent of someone who has OCD, a kid who has OCD, or an adult, it's an agenda that you can reinforce for your loved one with OCD. Look, we don't let this get in the way. We've got too many important things to do.
Yeah.
Even though it sometimes feels unpleasant and uncomfortable, that doesn't have to stop us.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's such an important message for everybody, just for a good quality of life.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that's easy, by the way.
No, it's hard.
It's a challenge. It takes a lot. It's like with any of these things. These are skills. It takes
Yeah.
work. It takes practice. But I think that is such a fruitful agenda to have.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So your book, Living Well with OCD, it's currently available. Is it out already?
It is out. You can find it. Well, the publisher is Guilford Press. Guilford Publications. They would want me to say the best way to find it is to go on their website and buy it directly from them. So guilford.com. But if you go online and you type in Living Well with OCD, Jonathan Abramowitz, it's out there. You can find it. Thanks for considering that, but it's out there. You can find it.
Well, I will leave a link in the show notes so everybody can just click on it or put the publisher's link, or Amazon. People like Amazon. And I definitely recommend it. I think it's a great, meaty, simplistic book that will help guide parents if they're looking at just kind of, the different categories, or just one that you leave on on your child's bed, 13 or young adult, to help navigate them.
Yeah. So. And you know what? And thank you for saying that. Don't force them to read it.
Yeah.
Because like you were talking about, 13-year-old, if mom says, white, the 13-year-old is going to say black, right? In most cases, if they're anything like my kids were, mine are older also. But yeah, you leave it there and you say, well, if you're up for it, and then you walk away. And if you don't push it, they're, they still might be interested. If you push it, then you make it, in many cases, more likely that they're not going to want to read the book or do anything else, right? I'd love to come back at some point and talk about kind of like how do we manage when kids don't want to get treatment or stuff like that.
Oh, that would be such a good topic. I will definitely invite you back for that, because that's the number one question that parents have. And you're just so skilled at helping people navigate those things. So I appreciate that. And thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Natasha. It's a pleasure.
Well, I hope that you found that interview helpful. I think he's a great person to talk to about navigating OCD. And like I said in the intro, we'll definitely have him back on to talk about his other book and his guidance on how to navigate getting over OCD. So you can check out his book, Living Well with OCD. I'll leave a link in the show notes so that you can just click on that. It is wherever books are sold. And also check out the Family Guide to Getting Over OCD, Reclaim Your Life and Help Your Loved One. I bet that's a good one. I haven't read it yet, but I feel like things that he writes and things he does tend to be really good. So I will read that and I'll have him back on the show for that one. I hope that you are doing well. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to hit a star, write a review to show that you are appreciating it and let other families know that there's value in this podcast. And don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. And I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.